Hey, I'm Eddie, and welcome to Sonically Sound, a channel dedicated to helping you with the music industry. Today, we're going to be going over microphones. We'll talk about what the differences between them are and what best uses for them are in both live and studio scenarios. Let's get started. Before we talk about microphone types, we're going to need to talk about polar patterns. All mics have them, and it's important that you know what they are in order to make a good mic choice. A polar pattern is about how well a mic picks up sound from certain angles. This is a polar pattern diagram. The most important thing are the 4 points around the diagram. This shows the angle at which the sound source is coming from in reference to the mic. 0 degrees means the sound source is directly in front of the mic. This is also called on axis. 180 degrees is directly behind the microphone. There are 3 main polar patterns, and these will be the ones you encounter the most. The first one is omnidirectional. Now this one's pretty straightforward. The word omni means all, so the name suggests that it picks up all directions. It'll pick up a sound source from whatever direction it's coming from. You might be wondering what the uses for an omnidirectional mic are. Well, it's quite useful for picking up a reverberant room. It will pick up sound from all different angles, and so therefore is quite useful. The next polar pattern is called cardioid. It's also called unidirectional, which gives away its purpose. It's very directional, which means if you point it at a sound source, it will pick it up. The useful thing about this polar pattern is that it completely rejects sound behind it, as you can see on this diagram. This can be incredibly useful for live scenarios. If a singer's standing on stage, the mic doesn't want to be picking up the audience behind it. Now let's show you a clear difference between omnidirectional and cardioid polar patterns. This here is a Rode NT2. This condenser microphone can switch between omnidirectional and cardioid polar pattern. So we're going to use this to show you an example of how both of them work. At the moment it's set to cardioid, which means that on axis is going to pick up my voice very well, as I said before. But once I start walking around, you'll probably notice that my voice will be a lot less clear, and you may not hear it as well, especially if I'm directly behind the microphone. You might still be able to hear stuff, but this will be because of the reflections in the room. But it won't sound the same as when I'm talking directly in front of the microphone, like this. Now let's try it with omnidirectional. You might be able to already hear a difference in the sound, as it's picking up all directions now rather than just on axis. And as I start to move round, it's sounding the same. No matter if I'm on axis or off axis, it's going to sound exactly the same because it picks up sound equally from all different directions. Whereas a cardioid polar pattern picks up only on axis, picks up some of the sides and hardly anything from the back. You're probably most likely to use the cardioid polar pattern simply because when you point it at a sound source, it picks it up. It's straightforward, but there are variations to this polar pattern. Supercardioid. Now the name suggests that this is an improved version upon the cardioid polar pattern, and the reason for that is it's more directional. It picks up better from the front and it picks up less on the sides. However, a compromise for this means it picks more up from the back, so it may not be better in live scenarios, but it is more directional, so it's something worth thinking about. The other variation is hypercardioid. This is even more sensitive than the supercardioid, but once again picks up even more from the back. The final polar pattern you need to know about is called figure of 8. The reason it's called this is because of the shape it makes on the polar pattern. Basically, what it means is it picks up best from the front of the microphone and the back of the microphone. But the main reason it's used is for the mid-side technique when recording an acoustic space, but that's a completely different topic, which we'll cover in another video. Now we've gone through polar patterns, let's go to the next step, microphone types. There are quite a few microphone types, but we're going to be focusing on the most important ones. You need to know which one's best for the right sound you want. The first microphone type, and typically the most common, is the dynamic microphone. Dynamic microphones have what is called a diaphragm inside the mic. When sound is produced near it, the airwaves move the diaphragm, which is connected to a coil wrapped around a magnet. When the coil moves around the magnet, it creates an electrical signal, which is then sent down the mic and is later converted back into sound. This way of creating sound is relatively cheap and also makes the microphone very robust. However, it's not ideal for something that requires a lot of detail to be captured, like a violin. Dynamic microphones can handle a lot of SPL. SPL means sound pressure level. This is basically where the air pushes very hard on the diaphragm, and it can handle this very well, which makes it ideal for something like a kick drum. One of the most popular dynamic microphones is called the Shure SM58. You've probably seen it around, but maybe didn't know what the name of it was. This is a Shure SM58. It's very cheap, very durable, and I recommend you get one. The next microphone type is called Condenser. This is the other very common microphone type, but it works completely different to dynamic. The diaphragm is made of a much thinner, more delicate material. It uses a thin metal diaphragm that is electrically charged with a thicker metal backplate. That creates an electrical signal when the diaphragm is moved closer and further away from the backplate. With condensers being electrically charged, this means that they have to have power to them. They require 48 volts to work, and this is sometimes referred to as phantom power. You'll probably hear a lot of people say that condenser microphones capture a more clear or true sound. This basically means what you hear in real life is what you hear on the microphone. Because the microphone captures such a great quality, it does make the microphone a lot more expensive, but it is worth it. Typically, condenser microphones are used in studios. This is because the condenser microphone picks up a lot of detail. So if you have it outside, you'll hear a lot of wind, you may hear a lot of people talking in the background, and if you're in a live scenario, you'd be able to hear everything. You'd hear all the audience, and that's probably not what you want. The reason it works in a studio is because the studio will have been acoustically treated. This basically means that no sound from the outside will get in, and any sound from the inside won't have loads of reflections. This is why condensers are best for studio. Condenser microphones are really good for recording vocals, cymbals, strings, and other orchestral instruments. This is because these instruments have a wide dynamic range, basically meaning there are a lot of quiet bits and a lot of loud bits. You can imagine a violin in an orchestral piece. It's going to be quiet in some points, but maybe it's going to get much louder later. You need a condenser microphone to pick up those quiet points, as well as the loud points. The next microphone type is called ribbon. A ribbon microphone is a very old type of microphone, and was one of the first ones out. It was used mainly in the 1920s in the film industry for recording vocals and films. This microphone works by inducing a current through a sheet of metal, which is the diaphragm. The metal, however, is very thin, like a ribbon. This makes the ribbon microphone very fragile, so if you ever get your hands on one, be careful. It can't handle high SPL, so make sure you don't use it on anything too loud, and also it won't work in spikes of current. You might even break it, so make sure you don't put phantom power through it. Ribbon microphones have a lot of features that other microphones don't have typically. For instance, it has a polar pattern of figure of 8. It doesn't always, but it's the most common one. This is because how the diaphragm works. It moves in both directions, so therefore picks up both on axis and directly behind. Also, a ribbon microphone has a high-end roll-off. This basically means that the higher frequencies aren't picked up as well as the lower ones. Although this is a bit annoying and you might not be able to get a true sound out of it like you would a condenser, it can be quite useful. You can use it artistically and you can get a really warm sound from a vocal. Or you can use it on brass instruments that naturally sound quite harsh. It might sound quite nice using a ribbon microphone. The next microphone type is called a piezoelectric microphone. It's sometimes known as a boundary microphone. Now this works with a mini condenser diaphragm inside of the microphone. The reason it's different from a condenser microphone is because it can be wall mounted. So you could put it on a wall and capture the acoustic sound of a room, or you could put it on a piano lid and it's out the way and quite easy to mic up. The other way you could use it, and this is probably the most common, is putting it inside of a kick drum. This captures the really low end of the kick, while the outside kick drum captures the punch. Together, it can be blended really nicely. The final microphone type we're going to look at today is stereo microphones. It sounds quite straightforward. It's basically two microphones in one housing. So you get a left output and a right output. You could use this for recording a large choir or a piano or anything that you want a left and right output of. Basically, it works by using a certain type of stereo pair technique. You can use the spaced pair, which is basically two mics with a certain distance apart, like this, or it's a coincident pair, or XY pair, which looks like this. Hopefully, you should now know what microphones are best for what jobs. Just remember though, this is my personal opinion and a guide, so if you want to try something else, go for it. There's nothing wrong with experimenting. Hopefully, I've answered all the questions you need on microphones, and now you can go out and do it yourself. I hope you guys liked that video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want more videos from Sonically Sound, hit the subscribe button. If you want to leave a question, or just want to say what you thought about the video, don't forget to put a comment in the comment section. I'm Eddie, and this is Sonically Sound signing off.